The galaxy had seen many wonders, but none quite like the vessel that drifted through the neutral zone between the Galactic Federation territories and the unexplored rim worlds. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of a Federation dreadnought, yet it bore no markings of any known civilization. The hull was a deep obsidian black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, giving the ship an ominous presence that made even veteran space captains nervous. Captain Xanthara of the Federation cruiser Stellar Dawn was one such veteran. Her crystalline skin, characteristic of the Veltar race, flickered with anxious purple patterns as she studied the readings from her sensor array. In her 300 years of service, she had encountered dozens of alien species, explored countless star systems, and faced pirates, rebels, and natural disasters with unwavering courage. But this ship made her nervous in a way she couldn't quite explain. "Captain," called out her science officer, a tall, spindly Gethani named Loktar, "I'm detecting massive energy signatures from that vessel. The power output is unlike anything in our databases. It's as if the entire ship is one giant reactor." Xanthara's pattern shifted to a deeper purple. "Any response to our hails?" "Negative, Captain. We've tried on all known frequencies. Either they can't hear us, or they're choosing not to respond." The mysterious ship had appeared in this sector 3 days ago, and word had quickly spread through the Federation networks. Ships from a dozen different species had approached it, all hoping to make first contact with what could be a new civilization. The results had been concerning. The first to approach had been a Corvan trade vessel. The Corvans were known throughout the galaxy for their diplomatic skills and their ability to communicate with almost any intelligent species. They had gotten within 1,000 kilometers before their ship suddenly stopped responding to all communications. When a rescue team arrived, they found the trade vessel intact but completely empty. No signs of struggle, no evidence of what had happened to the crew. They had simply vanished. Next came a scientific expedition from the Threx Collective. The Threx were brilliant researchers, their massive brains capable of processing information at incredible speeds. They had approached with caution, broadcasting mathematical sequences and scientific principles in an attempt to establish peaceful contact. Like the Corvans, they had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only an empty ship. The pattern continued. The insectoid HFY sent their best diplomats. Gone. The energy-based lifeforms known as the Lumera tried to communicate through electromagnetic pulses. They too vanished. Each approach ended the same way: empty ships and missing crews. The Federation had finally established a safe perimeter around the mysterious vessel, warning all traffic to stay at least 5,000 kilometers away. But the disappearances had sparked fear throughout the galaxy. Rumors spread like wildfire through the comm networks. Some said it was a weapon built by an unknown enemy. Others believed it was some kind of trap, perhaps left by an extinct civilization as a final act of revenge against the living. Captain Xanthara was studying the latest intelligence reports when her communications officer, a young Veltar named Rintel, suddenly straightened in his chair. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from Earth Command." Xanthara's pattern shifted to surprised yellow. Earth Command rarely involved itself in frontier incidents. The humans were relatively new members of the Federation, having joined only 50 years ago after their first contact with Veltar explorers. While they had proven to be capable allies, they generally preferred to handle their own affairs. "Put it through," she ordered. The viewscreen flickered to life, showing the weathered face of Admiral Sarah Chen, one of Earth's most respected military leaders. Despite being only in her 60s, which was young by galactic standards, Chen had already earned a reputation for brilliant tactical thinking and an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure. "Captain Xanthara," Chen said with a slight nod, "I've been following the reports about the unidentified vessel. I'm transmitting coordinates for a rendezvous point. We're sending a ship to investigate." Xanthara's patterns flickered with confusion. "Admiral, with all due respect, 17 ships have already attempted contact. All have resulted in the loss of their crews. Perhaps it would be wise to wait for the Federation Science Council to develop a more comprehensive approach." Chen's expression didn't change, but there was something in her eyes that reminded Xanthara why humans had earned a reputation for being unpredictable. I appreciate your concern, Captain, but we believe we have something that might make a difference. The ship we're sending is unique. If our theory is correct, it might be the only vessel capable of safely approaching that thing. Before Xanthara could ask what she meant, Chen continued, "We'll be there in 18 hours. Please maintain your perimeter and continue monitoring. And, Captain, no matter what you see, do not attempt to interfere unless we specifically request assistance." The transmission ended, leaving Xanthara staring at a blank screen. Her science officer approached, his expression puzzled. "Captain, what could the humans possibly have that we don't?" "Their technology is advanced, certainly, but not significantly beyond our own capabilities." Xanthara's pattern shifted to thoughtful blue. "I don't know, Loktar. But I've learned not to underestimate human ingenuity. They have a way of approaching problems that the rest of us would never consider." 18 hours later, the human vessel arrived at the rendezvous coordinates. Even Xanthara, who had seen hundreds of different ship designs, was taken aback by its appearance. It was smaller than most Federation cruisers, perhaps only 800 meters in length, but it looked like it had been built for war. The hull was angular and aggressive, covered in armor plating that seemed to absorb scanner beams. Weapon ports dotted its surface like the eyes of a predator, and strange symbols were painted along its sides in what appeared to be human script. "Captain," Loktar called out, his voice filled with disbelief, "I'm reading massive weapons systems on that ship. Energy cannons, missile batteries, defensive screens, it's armed beyond anything in the Federation fleet." Xanthara's pattern shifted to alarmed orange. "What kind of ship is this?" As if in answer to her question, her communications panel chimed with an incoming transmission. The face that appeared on screen was human, but, unlike Admiral Chen's diplomatic features, this man looked like he had been carved from stone. His dark eyes held a hardness that made even the veteran captain uncomfortable, and a jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw. "Federation vessel, this is Captain Marcus Kane of the UES Nightmare. We're proceeding with our mission as planned. Maintain your distance and do not interfere under any circumstances." "Captain Kane," Xanthara replied, trying to keep her voice steady, "may I ask what makes you believe your ship will succeed where others have failed?" Kane's expression didn't change, but she could see something dark flicker in his eyes. "Because, Captain, my ship was built for one specific purpose, to go places where no one else can survive. And my crew, well, let's just say we're uniquely qualified for this kind of mission." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Xanthara with more questions than answers. She watched on the main view screen as the human vessel began moving toward the mysterious black ship. Unlike the previous attempts, the Nightmare didn't approach slowly or cautiously. It moved with purpose, like a predator stalking its prey. As the human ship drew closer to the mysterious vessel, Xanthara noticed something strange. The usual energy fluctuations that had preceded the other disappearances weren't occurring. Instead, the black ship seemed to be responding. Lights began appearing along its hull, not the harsh artificial illumination of technology, but something organic, almost alive. "Captain," Loktar reported, his voice filled with wonder, "the unknown vessel is powering up systems we didn't even know it had. But, the energy signatures, they're not threatening. If anything, they seem almost welcoming." On the view screen, they could see the two ships drawing closer together. The Nightmare showed no signs of slowing down or changing course. As it approached the massive black vessel, openings began to appear in the obsidian hull, revealing docking bays that seemed to have been specifically designed for the human ship. "Impossible," whispered Rintel. "It's as if that ship was waiting for them." Captain Kane's voice crackled over the comb one final time, "Federation vessels, this is the Nightmare. We are proceeding with docking procedures. Do not approach under any circumstances. What happens next is strictly human business." As they watched, the human ship disappeared into the depths of the mysterious vessel. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the black ship began to move. Not the random drift it had maintained for the past 3 days, but purposeful movement toward the edge of the galaxy. Xanthara's pattern shifted to deep purple with streaks of gold, a combination that indicated both fear and awe. In all her years of service, she had never seen anything like this. A ship that had destroyed or consumed 17 different crews had not only accepted the humans but seemed to welcome them aboard. As the massive vessel disappeared into the darkness between stars, carrying the human crew to an unknown fate, Xanthara couldn't shake the feeling that they had just witnessed something that would change the galaxy forever. The question that haunted her was simple: what made humans so special that a ship which had rejected every other species in the galaxy had accepted them without hesitation? 3 days passed with no word from the Nightmare or its mysterious host ship. The Federation had deployed long-range sensors to track their progress, but the black vessel seemed to have some kind of stealth technology that made it nearly impossible to follow. They had managed to trace its general heading toward the galactic rim, but beyond that, they knew nothing. The incident had sent shockwaves through the Federation Council. Emergency sessions were called, with representatives from dozens of species trying to understand what had happened. Some demanded that a fleet be sent to track down the human ship, convinced that they had somehow allied themselves with a potential threat. Others argued that the humans might have saved them all from whatever the black ship represented. Captain Xanthara found herself caught in the middle of the political storm. As the ranking officer who had witnessed the event, she was called to testify before the council multiple times. Each session left her more frustrated than the last, as politicians from across the galaxy tried to use the incident to advance their own agendas. It was during one of these sessions that the first transmission arrived. Captain Xanthara was in her quarters aboard a Federation space station, preparing for yet another round of testimony, when her communications system activated with an incoming message from an unknown source. The face that appeared on her screen was human, but it wasn't Captain Kane. This was a woman, perhaps in her 30s, with short brown hair and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that made Xanthara automatically straighten. Captain Xanthara, my name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, and I'm transmitting this message from aboard what we've learned to call the Harbinger. I know you have questions about what happened, and I'm authorized to provide some answers. Xanthara's pattern shifted to intense curiosity as she leaned forward. Dr. Vasquez, the entire galaxy wants to know what happened out there. Is your crew safe? We're more than safe, Captain. We're exactly where we're supposed to be. Vasquez paused, as if choosing her words carefully. The ship you've been calling the mysterious vessel isn't mysterious at all. It's a test, Captain Xanthara. A test that was placed in our galaxy long ago by a species that wanted to find others worthy of joining them among the stars. A test? Xanthara repeated. But what kind of test results in the disappearance of entire crews? Vasquez's expression grew somber. The crews weren't killed, Captain. They were evaluated. The ship has the ability to scan not just the physical characteristics of a species, but their psychological, emotional, and spiritual makeup. Every species that approached was found wanting in some way. The Corvins, despite their diplomatic skills, were too focused on personal gain. The Threx, for all their intelligence, lacked the emotional depth needed for what lies ahead. Each species had their strengths, but they all fell short of the requirements. And humans? Xanthara asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. Humans passed, Captain. Not because we're better than the other species, but because we have something that the test was specifically looking for. Something that the species who built this ship valued above all else. Dr. Vasquez leaned back in her chair, and, for a moment, Xanthara could see something vast and star-filled behind her, as if she was sitting in a room made of transparent material floating in deep space. The builders of the Harbinger were warriors, Captain. Not conquerors or destroyers, but protectors. They spent millennia defending their part of the galaxy against threats that would have consumed entire civilizations. When their time came to an end, they didn't want their knowledge and purpose to die with them. So they created this ship as a way to find a species that could continue their mission. What kind of mission? Xanthara asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. There are things in the dark between galaxies, Captain. Ancient things that hunger for the light of living worlds. The builders of the Harbinger fought them for eons, keeping them at bay, protecting species like yours from threats they never even knew existed. But the builders are gone now, and the dark things are stirring again. Vasquez's image flickered for a moment, and, when it stabilized, her expression had grown grim. The test wasn't just to find a species capable of understanding the Builder's technology. It was to find a species willing to face impossible odds to protect others. A species that would choose to fight even when the battle seemed hopeless. The ship tested every aspect of the approaching cruise, and it found that most species, when faced with overwhelming danger, would seek to negotiate, hide, or find some clever solution that avoided direct conflict. And humans? When humans face impossible odds, we have a tendency to get angry and start shooting, Vasquez said with a slight smile. The ship's AI ran thousands of psychological simulations on Captain Kane and his crew during their approach. In every scenario involving threats to innocent life, the humans chose to fight, regardless of the cost to themselves. That's what it was looking for. That's why we were accepted. Xanthara felt her pattern shifting to a color she had never experienced before, a mixture of awe, fear, and something that might have been pride for her human allies. Dr. Vasquez, what happens now? Now we prepare, Captain. The Harbinger is taking us to a place where we can learn what we need to know. We're going to be trained in technologies and tactics that will make us capable of facing what's coming. And, when we return, well, the galaxy is going to need every ship, every species, every mind focused on a single goal, survival. The transmission ended, leaving Captain Xanthara staring at a blank screen. Outside her viewport, the stars looked the same as they always had, but she now knew that somewhere in the darkness between them, ancient evils were stirring. And the only thing standing between them and the civilized galaxy was a single ship crewed by the most dangerous species in known space, humans. 6 months had passed since the nightmare disappeared with the mysterious vessel, and the galaxy had not remained idle. Dr. Vasquez's warning about ancient threats stirring in the dark had reached the highest levels of the Federation Council, though many representatives remained skeptical. The idea that some unknown enemy was preparing to attack seemed too fantastic to believe, especially when the only evidence came from a single transmission from humans aboard an alien ship. Captain Xanthara found herself assigned to a new position as liaison between the Federation fleet and Earth Command. It was a role that put her at the center of the growing tensions between those who believed the human warning and those who thought it was either a misunderstanding or an elaborate deception. The debate had raged for months in the council chambers. The Threx Collective, still bitter about the loss of their scientific expedition, argued that the humans had somehow manipulated the situation to gain access to advanced technology. They demanded that a fleet be sent to track down the Harbinger and force it to return the missing crews from all 17 ships. The Corvan Trade Federation took a different approach, suggesting that negotiations should be opened with whatever intelligence controlled the Harbinger. They believed that any species advanced enough to build such a vessel could be reasoned with, and that economic incentives might prove more effective than military threats. Only a few species, mostly those with strong military traditions, took the human warning seriously. The warrior clans of the Kethari had immediately begun expanding their fleets, while the defensive-minded Yiltarun had started construction on new shield generators around their homeworld. Captain Xanthara was reviewing intelligence reports in her new office at Federation headquarters when her assistant, a young Gethani named Peltar, rushed in with an expression of barely controlled excitement. "Captain, you need to see this immediately. We're receiving a transmission on a frequency that shouldn't exist. The signal is coming from somewhere beyond the galactic rim, and the power required to reach us from that distance should be impossible." Xanthara's pattern shifted to alert orange as she followed Peltar to the communications center. The massive chamber was filled with technicians from a dozen different species, all working frantically to analyze the incoming signal. At the center of the chaos stood Admiral Chen, who had arrived from Earth only hours earlier. "Admiral," Xanthara called out as she approached, "what's the situation?" Chen turned, and Xanthara was struck by how much the human leader had aged in just 6 months. There were new lines around her eyes, and her hair had gone completely gray. But there was also something else in her expression, something that reminded Xanthara of a predator that had caught the scent of its prey. "We're about to find out if the galaxy is ready to face the truth," Chen said grimly. "The signal is from Captain Kane aboard the Harbinger. He's requesting permission to transmit to the entire Federation simultaneously." Xanthara's patterns flickered with confusion. The entire Federation? That would require accessing the emergency broadcast network. The Council would never approve such a thing without knowing the content. They don't get a choice, Shen replied. Under Article 7 of the Federation Charter, any member species has the right to address the entire Federation if they have evidence of an immediate threat to galactic security. The humans are invoking that right. Before Xanthara could respond, the communications array suddenly activated on its own. Emergency override codes flashed across every screen in the chamber, and warning klaxons began sounding throughout the station. Across the galaxy, every Federation vessel, every planetary communication network, and every government facility received the same message: emergency broadcast authorized by Federation Charter Article 7. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the interior of what could only be the Harbinger's bridge. The chamber was vast, with walls that seemed to be made of some kind of living crystal that pulsed with inner light. Advanced holographic displays showed star charts that covered not just their galaxy but dozens of others, and, in the center of it all stood Captain Kane. The human looked different than he had 6 months ago. His uniform had been replaced by something that seemed to be part clothing, part armor, made from the same living crystal as the ship's walls. But it was his eyes that had changed the most. They held a depth of knowledge that seemed almost alien, as if he had seen things that no mortal being was meant to witness. Citizens of the Galactic Federation, Kane began, his voice carrying a weight of absolute authority. 6 months ago, my crew and I were accepted aboard this vessel because we passed a test that 17 other expeditions had failed. Today, I'm going to tell you exactly what that test was, and why it may determine whether our galaxy survives the next year. Kane gestured to one of the holographic displays, which showed a detailed image of their galaxy as viewed from above. The species that built the Harbinger called themselves the Eternal Vigil. For over 50 million years, they defended this galaxy against threats from the void between star systems. They fought enemies that exist in dimensions beyond our understanding, creatures that feed on the life force of entire civilizations. The image shifted, showing the space between galaxies. At first, it appeared empty, but, as Kane manipulated the display, dark shapes began to appear. They moved through space like massive shadows, each one easily the size of a solar system. These beings are called the Devourers by those few who have encountered them and survived. They exist in the spaces between realities, feeding on the energy that all living things generate. A single Devourer can strip the life from an entire planet in hours, leaving behind nothing but lifeless rock. The Eternal Vigil held them back for millennia, but, eventually, even they fell to the Devourer's endless hunger. Kane's expression grew darker as he continued. Before they died, the Eternal Vigil created the Harbinger as both a weapon and a test. They knew that someday, the Devourers would return, and they wanted to ensure that there would be someone capable of continuing the fight. The ship was programmed to search for a species that possessed the one quality the Vigil believed was essential for standing against impossible odds: the willingness to fight even when victory seems impossible. The holographic display shifted again, showing the approaches of various Federation ships to the Harbinger. Xanthara watched in fascination as the display analyzed each crew's psychological profile in real time. Every species that approached the Harbinger was thoroughly scanned and evaluated. The Corvins, despite their diplomatic skills, showed a tendency to seek compromise even when facing an enemy that cannot be reasoned with. The Threks, for all their intelligence, would always look for a logical solution that avoided direct confrontation. Species after species showed the same pattern: when faced with an enemy that could not be negotiated with, outsmarted, or avoided, they would seek alternative solutions rather than stand and fight. Kane stepped closer to the camera, and Xanthara could see something burning in his eyes that made her patterns shift to deep purple. Humans are different. When we encounter an enemy that threatens innocent lives, our first instinct isn't to negotiate or find a clever solution. Our first instinct is to grab the biggest weapon we can find and start shooting. The Harbinger's AI ran thousands of simulations on my crew during our approach, testing our responses to various scenarios. In every single simulation that involved protecting others from an implacable enemy, we chose to fight, regardless of the odds against us. The display changed once more, showing what appeared to be a massive space battle. Ships that looked like they were made of shadow and nightmare fought against vessels of crystalline beauty that could only have belonged to the Eternal Vigil. The Vigil's final battle took place 63 years ago, Kane continued, just 7 years before humanity made first contact with the Federation. The last of their warrior priests gave their lives to drive back the Devourer fleet, but they knew it was only a temporary victory. The Devourers would return, and, when they did, they would bring greater numbers and more powerful weapons. Kane paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in across the galaxy. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of grim determination that sent chills down Xanthera's spine. 3 days ago, our long-range sensors detected movement in the void beyond the galactic rim. The Devourer fleet is returning, and they'll reach Federation space in less than 8 months. They're bringing enough ships to consume every inhabited world in the galaxy, and they've learned from their encounters with the Eternal Vigil. This time, they're prepared to face any defense we might mount. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the Harbinger's systems. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched in stunned silence as the full scope of the threat became clear. However, Kane continued, the 6 months we've spent aboard the Harbinger have not been wasted. The ship has been teaching us everything the Eternal Vigil learned about fighting the Devourers. We've mastered weapons that can strike at enemies in multiple dimensions simultaneously. We've learned to pilot craft that exist partially outside normal spacetime. And, most importantly, we've discovered how to turn ordinary Federation vessels into weapons capable of harming beings that exist beyond physical reality. The display shifted to show technical specifications for weapon systems and defensive technologies that were far beyond anything in the Federation's current arsenal. Mathematical formulas scrolled past faster than most minds could process, but even a glance was enough to show that these were technologies that could revolutionize warfare itself. The modifications required are extensive, Kane explained, but they can be installed on existing Federation vessels. The Harbinger contains manufacturing facilities that can produce the necessary components, and the ship's AI has already designed retrofit packages for every class of vessel in the Federation fleet. Captain Xanthera felt her patterns shifting through a complex series of colors as she tried to process what she was hearing. The implications were staggering. If what Kane was saying was true, then humanity had essentially been chosen as the galaxy's champions against an enemy that most species couldn't even comprehend. But there's a catch, Kane continued, and his expression grew even grimmer. The weapon systems and defensive technologies of the Eternal Vigil require a specific kind of mental discipline to operate effectively. They respond to determination, aggression, and the willingness to sacrifice everything to protect others. Most Federation species possess these qualities to some degree, but not in the combination or intensity required. Kane gestured to something off-camera, and Dr. Vasquez stepped into view. She looked as changed as Kane, wearing the same living crystal armor and carrying the same weight of terrible knowledge in her eyes. We've run extensive tests on human volunteers, Vasquez said, taking over the explanation. Humans can operate Vigil technology with an efficiency rating of 93%. We've also tested artificial intelligences based on the psychological patterns of other Federation species. The results were disappointing. She manipulated the display to show a series of efficiency ratings. Xanthera's heart sank as she saw the numbers. The Veltar rated only 47% efficiency. The Corvins managed 31%. Even the warrior clans of the Kethari only achieved 53%. What this means, Kane said, stepping back into view, is that while we can retrofit Federation vessels with Vigil technology, they'll need human crews to operate at full effectiveness. The Harbinger is returning to Federation space to begin the retrofit process, but we're going to need every human ship, every human pilot, and every human warrior the Earth can provide. Kane's image leaned forward, and, when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. In 8 months, the largest fleet in galactic history is going to attack every inhabited world simultaneously. The enemy we face has consumed hundreds of galaxies, and they've never been permanently defeated. But the Eternal Vigil held them back for 50 million years with courage, determination, and the willingness to fight impossible battles. He straightened, and, for a moment, Xanthera could see something in his expression that reminded her why humans had earned their reputation as the most dangerous species in known space. The Vigil chose humanity to carry on their mission, and we will not let them down. We will not let the galaxy down. And we will not let the Devourers claim a single life without paying for it in blood. The transmission ended, leaving the communications center in absolute silence. Across the galaxy, billions of beings sat in stunned quiet as they tried to process what they had just heard. The comfortable certainty of their ordered existence had just been shattered by the knowledge that an enemy beyond their comprehension was coming to destroy everything they had ever known. But, in the silence, Captain Zenthara heard something else. From the human section of the station, she could hear voices raised in discussion, the sound of people making plans and preparing for war. While the rest of the galaxy struggled to accept the reality of their situation, the humans were already moving into action. Admiral Chen turned to face her, and Zenthara was surprised to see something that might have been satisfaction in the human leader's eyes. "Captain," Chen said quietly, "I think it's time you understood exactly why the Eternal Vigil chose us. Every other species in the galaxy has just learned that they're facing extinction, and their first reaction is shock, fear, and confusion. Humans just learned we're facing extinction, and our first reaction is to start figuring out how to kill the bastards who think they can threaten our friends." As if to prove her point, the communication array activated again, this time with transmissions from Earth itself. Military commanders were already discussing fleet deployments. Scientists were analyzing the technical specifications from the Harbinger. Industrial facilities were being converted to produce weapons and armor that hadn't existed an hour ago. Captain Zenthara's pattern shifted to a color she had never experienced before, a deep gold that indicated awe mixed with something that might have been hope. For the first time since Kane's transmission began, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, the galaxy might actually survive what was coming. The Harbinger's return to Federation space created chaos unlike anything in galactic history. The massive vessel took position in the Sol system, Earth's home, and immediately began the most ambitious industrial project ever attempted. Using matter converters that operated on principles beyond current understanding, the ship began producing retrofit packages for every vessel in the Federation fleet. Captain Zenthara stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned Federation command ship Unity, watching the incredible sight through reinforced transparasteel. The Harbinger hung in space like a dark moon, its crystalline superstructures extended outward for dozens of kilometers. Smaller vessels swarmed around it like worker insects, carrying the precious technology that might be their only hope for survival. The past 3 months had transformed not just the Federation fleet, but the entire political landscape of the galaxy. The revelation about the Devourers had shattered decades of careful diplomatic balance as species scrambled to align themselves with Earth's growing military importance. Some, like the Veltar and the defensive-minded Yiltaran, had embraced the alliance immediately. Others remained suspicious, believing the humans were using the threat as an excuse to seize military dominance. "Captain," called out Commander Sarah Mitchell, the human officer who had been assigned as Zenthara's tactical advisor, were receiving final confirmation from the retrofit teams. The Unity's weapons systems are now fully operational. Zenthara's pattern shifted to cautious optimism as she turned from the viewport. The Unity represented something entirely new in galactic warfare, a vessel that combined the best engineering from a dozen Federation species with weapons technology from the Eternal Vigil. The result was a ship that could engage enemies in multiple dimensions simultaneously while maintaining the tactical flexibility that had made Federation vessels effective against conventional threats. But the true test would come when they faced the Devourers themselves. "How are our human crew members adapting to the Vigil systems?" Zenthara asked. Mitchell's expression grew thoughtful. "Better than we expected, actually. It seems like the technology was designed for minds that think like humans do. Our weapons crews are reporting efficiency ratings even higher than what Captain Kane achieved during the initial tests." Zenthara had spent considerable time studying the retrofit process, trying to understand exactly how the Vigil technology worked. The weapons themselves were fascinating, energy cannons that could adjust their frequency to target enemies existing in parallel dimensions, defensive shields that operated by creating localized distortions in spacetime, and sensors that could detect the unique energy signatures that the Devourers generated when they prepared to feed. But it was the mental requirements that truly set the technology apart. The Vigil weapons responded not just to conscious commands, but to the operator's emotional state and psychological makeup. They required a level of aggressive determination that most Federation species found uncomfortable to maintain. Humans, on the other hand, seemed to slip into the required mindset as naturally as breathing. Captain Zenthara, came another voice from across the bridge. We're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Chen aboard the Harbinger. Put it through, Zenthara ordered. Admiral Chen's image appeared on the main view screen, but she looked different than she had even weeks ago. The living crystal armor she now wore seemed to pulse with inner light, and her eyes held a depth that suggested she had seen far beyond the normal boundaries of reality. Captain, we've just received confirmation from our long-range sensors. The Devourer fleet has accelerated their approach. They'll reach the outer systems in 6 weeks, not the 8 months we originally projected. Zenthara felt her patterns shift to alarm purple. 6 weeks? That's barely enough time to complete the retrofit program for the outer defense fleets. Which is why we're implementing Emergency Protocol 7, Chen replied grimly. All non-essential Federation vessels are being recalled to defensive positions around major population centers. We're abandoning the outer colonies and consolidating our forces for a concentrated defense. The weight of what Chen was saying hit Zenthara like a physical blow. The outer colonies represented millions of lives and decades of careful expansion. Abandoning them meant accepting that entire worlds would fall to the Devourers without any attempt at defense. Admiral, Zenthara said carefully, the colonies can't be evacuated in 6 weeks. We're talking about abandoning billions of people. Chen's expression didn't change, but something hard flickered in her eyes. No, Captain. We're talking about ensuring that some people survive. If we spread our forces too thin trying to defend every world, we'll lose everything. The Eternal Vigil learned this lesson the hard way over 50 million years of warfare. Commander Mitchell stepped forward, her voice tight with controlled emotion. What about Earth's colony ships? We have enough vessels to evacuate at least some of the outer worlds. Already considered and rejected, Chen replied. Those colony ships are being converted to refugee vessels for the worlds we can defend. Every transport we send to the outer colonies is one less ship available to evacuate the core worlds when the Devourers break through our defenses. The cold logic of Chen's words sent chills through everyone on the bridge. This was what command looked like when facing an enemy that could consume entire civilizations. Every decision carried the weight of billions of lives, and there were no good choices, only necessary ones. What are our orders, Admiral? Zenthara asked. The Unity will join Battle Group 7 under Captain Kane's direct command. You'll be defending the Centauri sector, including the major industrial worlds of New Geneva and Titan Base. Your primary objective is to hold the line long enough for the evacuation fleets to clear the core systems. Chen paused, and, when she continued, her voice carried a note of something that might have been pride. Captain, I want you to understand something. The next 6 weeks will likely determine whether intelligent life continues to exist in this galaxy. The Devourers aren't just another enemy fleet. They're a force of nature, like a cosmic hurricane that destroys everything in its path. The only reason we have any chance at all is because 50 million years ago, another species faced the same choice we're facing now, and they chose to fight. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Through the viewports, they could see the frantic activity around the Harbinger as the final retrofit operations continued. Somewhere in the distance, evacuation fleets were already beginning to move, carrying refugees from the outer systems toward the dubious safety of the core worlds. Captain Zenthara had commanded ships through dozens of conflicts, but she had never faced anything like this. In previous wars, there had always been clear objectives: territory to be defended, resources to be protected, political goals to be achieved. This was different. This was about survival itself, and the enemy they faced didn't want to conquer or control. It wanted to consume. Captain, Commander Mitchell said quietly, I know this situation is unprecedented, but I want you to know that the human crew members aboard this ship are honored to serve under your command. We've studied the records of your previous campaigns, and we believe that having an experienced Federation officer leading this mission might give us an advantage that the Devourers won't expect. Zenthara's pattern shifted to surprised gold. What do you mean? The Eternal Vigil fought the Devourers for 50 million years using strategies based on their own psychological makeup, direct confrontation, overwhelming firepower, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. Those tactics worked, but they also eventually led to the Vigil's extinction. Maybe it's time to try something different. Before Xanthera could respond, the tactical alert systems activated throughout the ship. Lieutenant Peltar, now serving as the Unity's sensor operator, called out from his station with barely controlled excitement. "Captain, we're detecting massive spatial distortions at the edge of the system. The signatures match the theoretical models for Devourer approach vectors." Xanthera's pattern shifted to combat orange as training took over. "How many ships?" "That's just it, Captain. We're not detecting individual ships. We're detecting a single massive distortion that's larger than anything in our database. If the sensors are accurate, we're looking at something that's approximately the size of a small moon." The main viewscreen shifted to show the long-range sensor display. At the very edge of their detection range, space itself seemed to be twisting and writhing like a living thing. As they watched, the distortion began to take on a more defined shape, revealing what could only be described as a nightmare made manifest. The Devourer ship, if it could even be called a ship, looked like it had been grown rather than built. Its hull was a deep black that seemed to absorb light, but, unlike the Harbinger's elegant obsidian surfaces, this looked organic, almost alive. Tendrils of shadow stretched out from its main body, reaching through space toward the inner system like the arms of some cosmic predator testing the waters. "Captain," came another voice from across the bridge, "we're receiving an emergency transmission from the Harbinger. All ships are ordered to Battle Alert Status 1. This is not a drill." As if the universe itself was responding to the alert, every ship in the system began moving into defensive formations. The great industrial complexes around the Harbinger started folding back into the ship's hull, while the defensive platforms that had been hastily constructed over the past months powered up their weapons systems. Captain Kane's voice crackled over the communication system, reaching every ship simultaneously. "All Federation vessels, this is Harbinger Actual. What you're seeing is a Devourer scout ship. It's testing our defenses and trying to determine how much resistance it will face when the main fleet arrives. Under no circumstances are you to engage unless directly ordered. Our goal is to gather intelligence while revealing as little as possible about our capabilities." Xanthera watched the alien vessel with a mixture of fascination and horror. Even from this distance, she could feel something wrong about it, as if its very presence was somehow offensive to the natural order of reality. The ship moved through space with a fluid grace that suggested it wasn't entirely bound by normal physics, and the shadowy tendrils that extended from its hull seemed to be testing the space around them like a blind predator searching for prey. "Captain," Commander Mitchell said quietly, "I'm reading energy signatures from that thing that don't match anything in our databases. It's like it's drawing power from somewhere outside normal spacetime." As they watched, one of the shadow tendrils extended toward a small asteroid that had been orbiting at the edge of the system. When the tendril touched the rock, the asteroid simply ceased. Not destroyed, not vaporized, but erased from existence as if it had never been there at all. "By the sacred crystals," whispered Lieutenant Peltar, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror, "it just consumed that asteroid completely. There's not even debris left behind." The Devourer scout continued its survey of the system for another 20 minutes, its shadow tendrils reaching out to sample various objects, more asteroids, a derelict cargo hauler that had been abandoned in the outer system, even clouds of interstellar gas. Everything it touched simply vanished, consumed by whatever impossible hunger drove the creature. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the scout ship began to withdraw. The spatial distortions around it intensified, and, within moments, it had disappeared entirely, leaving behind only empty space and the memory of something that should not exist. The communication system activated again, and Captain Kane's voice filled the Unity's bridge. "All ships, stand down from Battle Alert Status 1. The scout has withdrawn, but this was just the beginning. Analysis of its behavior suggests that the main fleet will arrive in approximately 4 weeks, and they'll be bringing enough ships to attack every inhabited system simultaneously." Xanthera felt her patterns shifting through a complex series of colors as the full scope of their situation became clear. They had just witnessed a demonstration of power that rendered conventional warfare meaningless. The enemy they faced could erase matter from existence with casual ease, and the scout ship had been gathering intelligence about every defense the Federation could mount. "Captain," Commander Mitchell said, "we need to contact Admiral Chen immediately. If that was just a scout, And if the main fleet is even more powerful, then our current defensive strategies may be completely inadequate. Agreed, Xanthara replied, but even as she spoke, she was thinking about what Mitchell had said earlier about trying something different. The Eternal Vigil had fought these creatures for 50 million years using direct confrontation and overwhelming firepower. Maybe it was time for a more subtle approach. Commander, I want you to begin working with the tactical team on alternative strategies. The Devourers expect us to fight them the way the Vigil did. What if we gave them something they weren't prepared for? Mitchell's eyes lit up with understanding. Asymmetric warfare. Use our advantages in mobility and coordination to strike where they don't expect it. Exactly. And I have a feeling that the diversity of Federation species might give us options that neither the Vigil nor the Devourers have considered. As the Unity joined the other ships in Battle Group 7, Captain Xanthara found herself facing the greatest challenge of her career. In 4 weeks, an enemy that had consumed hundreds of galaxies would arrive in Federation space. They would bring weapons that could erase matter from existence and hunger that could never be satisfied. But they would also be facing something they had never encountered before, a galaxy united not under a single species like the Eternal Vigil, but a confederation of dozens of different minds, each bringing their own unique perspectives to the art of war. The Devourers had learned to fight warriors like the Vigil. They might not be prepared to face diplomats like the Corvins, scientists like the Threx, or the unpredictable creativity of humans working together with alien minds. For the first time since the crisis began, Captain Xanthara allowed herself to hope that perhaps the galaxy's greatest weakness, its diversity, might actually prove to be its greatest strength.